Welcome to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this week's episode, I will be answering some user-submitted questions about screenplay formatting issues, whether or not I recommend contest and pitch fests, and how to sell your screenplay when you don't have any credits and don't know anybody in the industry. So this is literally my first episode, so I figured I would just do something that would be pretty easy while I figured out how podcasting worked. My plan is to publish about one podcast per month, depending on how much time they take to create. But for this episode, I just wanted to sort of feel my way through it and see how it goes. So please bear with me. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found in my blog in the show notes. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast. I'll also be publishing a transcript of this episode on that page. Just look for episode 1. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell Your Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. How to write a professional logline, how to write a professional query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know about selling a screenplay. So each episode, I thought it might be interesting if I just talked a little bit about what I was working on. I always find it really interesting just to hear other people kind of just talk about what they're doing and what they're working on. And you can usually just kind of pick up some little pearls of wisdom here and there just by hearing sort of the ins and outs of their day. So I thought that might be an interesting segment for the podcast. So I've actually been working on a writing assignment, which I actually got from one of my email fax blasts. I actually sent out a script called Meat Cleaver Massacre. It was a horror comedy, and a producer read it, and he actually was developing a mob comedy. So he thought that the tone and the scope of the projects were similar. So he ended up hiring me to write on his project. They had a pretty well developed outline. It was probably an 8 to 10 page outline. So they had a pretty clear story down and sort of some idea of the characters. I just went in, did some polish on the outline, and then basically wrote the script for them. And I have one more polish to do. I'm just waiting to get some notes back on that. It was kind of interesting in that it was not a story that I would have written myself if it had been up to me, if I had thought of the idea and sort of put it in my idea bank. It was a very simple story, and frankly I was very concerned when I first got the thing that I would be able to push it to 90 pages or 95 pages because it was just so simple. But I actually think it turned out pretty well, and it's kind of got me reevaluating how I go about looking at the next spec script that I'm going to write. Simple stories can actually work very, very well. I mean, something like National Lampoon's Vacation is a prime example of a very, very simple story. But if it's executed right, it can be very funny and very entertaining. And this was similar. It was a pretty simple story like that. And it was just a matter of kind of coming up with the zany characters and putting them in situations. And that really drove the humor. And I really, in the end, I had no trouble getting it to whatever it ended up being, about 95 pages. So I'm actually kind of rethinking. I'm going back through some of the log lines and some of the story ideas that I've had and seeing if maybe I should take a second look at them because of this. So now let's just get into the main segment of this week's episode, which is answering questions submitted by people on my email list. So I just sent out an email to everybody and just said, what screenwriting questions do you have? And a huge percentage of them were very specific formatting questions. How do you do this in a screenplay? How do you describe this particular scenario in a screenplay? The one thing I think you should kind of keep in mind when writing a screenplay is there's no like in high school, they would have this MLA guide and you would do a research paper and you had to make the research paper adhere to these very strict guidelines that some governing body had created. In screenwriting, there's none of that. I mean, there's some basic screenplay formatting, which is pretty much taken care of if you have some screenplay software like Final Draft. It'll pretty much format your screenplay correctly. All of these other little formatting issues, a lot of them are sort of so obscure and so specific. It's not like I've ever tried to do a lot of the things that were described, or a lot of the things that people were asking about. So my best advice when it comes to formatting is just make sure that it's clear, like the action is clear. Just make sure people that are reading the script will understand what's happening on screen, and don't get too caught up in sort of the complexities of formatting. Screenplay formatting, as I said, it's really very simple. And if you have some screenplay writing software like Final Draft, it takes care of it. You don't really have to worry about it, and it shouldn't be any kind of a stumbling block. The formatting, the screenplay formatting, that is really, it's really just a utility. When the script goes into production, there's certain things that different departments need, and that script is really the blueprint. So most of the formatting things, like capitalizing, interior, exterior, and capitalizing the name of the person speaking, it's a utility so that people can easily see it and understand what's going on when you're in production. So at this stage of the game, don't get too caught up. I mean, you're not going to do you really can't do it wrong. If you have some very complex thing, just break it down and describe it. Make sure it's clear. Take your time. Writing is rewriting. Just rewrite it a couple of times. Maybe give it to a friend. Let them read it. Ask them if it's clear. Ask them if they understand what the action is. So that's really my best advice for formatting issues. Don't get too caught up in the specifics. Just make sure it's clear. Write it out. Rewrite it if it's not clear to the people who read it. And that should get you a long ways to having a completed script. So I got a lot of questions on contests and pitch fests. People were just asking me if they thought that they should sign up for this contest or attend this pitch fest. When I first started writing screenplays, I did enter a bunch of contests, and I never did very well. And then I ended up selling something after about maybe 3 years. And a lot of the contests are specifically for people that have not sold stuff. But I just never really did very well in contests, so I just kind of never continued with it. I've never been to a pitch fest. I will say this: there's the Nicole Fellowship, which is a screenplay contest, and that one is well regarded in the industry. If you can place highly in that, that's definitely a good feather in your cap, and it's definitely something that has a certain amount of clout. Other than that, all of the screenplay festivals, they're screenplay contests. I mean, they might give away a little money, or they might introduce you to some managers and stuff, but they're pretty podunk. But here's the thing: the smaller contests, your chances of winning are probably pretty good. So kind of keep that in mind. One thing I will say is that you should really temper your expectations. A contest is even winning the Nicole Fellowship does not mean you're going to all of a sudden have a screenwriting career. It just means that you have done something that you can add to your query letter and your resume, and you can tell people about. But you can go to the website, and as I said, the Nicole Fellowship is probably the top screenwriting contest, and you can go to the website and look at some of the past scripts. The vast majority of them have not been made into movies. Two exceptions that I know of. There was a script called Butter that got made into a movie, and I actually watched it on Netflix. It's on Netflix on demand right now, so you can check it out. It's kind of a quirky comedy, and that's kind of my guess is what does well in contests is these sort of quirky comedies, not necessarily what you might see as like a mainstream Hollywood film. But again, maybe I'm the wrong person to ask because I never really did that well in contests. I've never been to a pitch fest. I did actually know someone who was a producer at a pitch fest, and she was a nice lady, but she really just worked at a production company, and she didn't really have any juice to like greenlight movies, and she was like one of the actual so-called producers at these pitch fests. So again, I would just really temper your expectations. I mean, most of the people that are attending the pitch fest as the producers, they're not really, the high-rolling producers that can just greenlight your script if they like it. They're going to be, hopefully just hardworking producers, and if they like your script, it might lead to some introductions or it might lead somewhere. So overall, here's my sort of thing about contests and pitch fests. If the money's not a big deal to you, I mean, I would recommend entering as many as you possibly can, because at the end of the day, the more credentials you have, the better off you're going to be. And I've definitely heard of people getting agents and getting managers from doing well in contests. And it's just something you can list on your query letter. It's something you can tell people, producers or agents, when you meet them. Hey, I was a runner-up in this contest. Hey, I won this contest. And even if it's not a big contest that they've heard of, it could still help a little bit. I mean, it gives you some, validation as a decent screenwriter. Now, on the flip side, and I mean, when I first started out screenwriting, I mean, I was working at a tennis club at the front desk, earning, $7-8 an hour. So the $50 was a lot of money to me then. And at the time, I really felt like I could do better just submitting scripts to production companies. And so if the money is a big issue and you really can't afford it, I would go in that direction. I think doing cold query letters is a more effective path, sending query letters to production companies, especially in this day and age. I mean, you can go on IMDb Pro. You can start finding email addresses. IMDb Pro is only $20 a month, and I think they give you a month for free. It might have only be $15 a month, but it's pretty inexpensive. I think they give you a month for free. So you can go on there. You can start to get some email addresses for free, and you can start to send out emails for free. So if money is an issue, I wouldn't necessarily waste my money on contests or pitch fest. But if money's not an issue, you might as well. My philosophy is just do everything, try everything, and see what works for you. You might find that you place well in contests, and that's how you kind of build a little momentum. You might find that you're excellent at pitching your script in person, and maybe you meet the right person at this pitch fest. So I don't think there's any harm in trying these things, but just kind of realize that the contests and the pitch fests, winning them, having a producer like your log line at a pitch fest, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to be an A-list screenwriter and you're going to have a screenwriting career. It's just a small stepping stone, a small bit that you can put on your resume and start to use to get some leverage. But at the end of the day, you got to sell some scripts. You got to get some scripts into production, and you got to start accruing some actual screenwriting credits. And I think that can be done more easily by actually submitting to production companies. So the single biggest question that I get is, how do I sell my screenplay? I get a ton of emails from people who are saying stuff like, I just finished my script, and can you send me a list of agents who are looking for material, or can you send me a list of producers, or can you help me sell my screenplay? So this isn't really surprising, considering my blog is called sellingyourscreenplay.com, and that's really what my blog and this podcast is all about. It's really about trying to help people to sell their screenplay. So one thing that I think is there's no one way to break in to the industry and sell your first couple of scripts. If you ask a bunch of different successful writers, you really will get a bunch of different answers. Everybody kind of has a slightly different take on what the best way to break in, and their story will be slightly different from the next person. The single biggest way that I've heard of people breaking in is getting a low-level job in the industry and basically networking, seeing what is selling, just kind of getting in the industry, immersing yourself in the industry. And that generally means moving to LA, maybe New York, but really LA, and finding a low-level job as a production assistant, as an assistant to a producer, an assistant to a writer, and just being around the industry. And then on your weekends or your spare time, your vacation, you start to write some spec scripts. So that's really the single biggest thing. The single biggest way that I've seen, just from talking to writers who are successful, is that seems to be kind of a common thread. But the cornerstone to my strategy is actually not that. And my strategy, and the way I've sold a bunch of scripts, is just by sending out a ton of cold query letters. Just head on over to IMDb and do a search for Ashley Scott Myers, and you'll see my credits. And I have a few halfway decent credits, and virtually all of them have been a direct result of me sending out cold query letters. And what that means is basically I just write up a query letter, I put a log line, a little bit about myself, and send it to a producer. And a small percentage of these query letters will actually result in a positive response where the producer will agree to read the screenplay, and then hopefully one thing leads to another, and options, and eventually hopefully they produce it. So I mentioned my free guide at the top of this show, and that really does go through all the actual steps to launching a query letter campaign for your screenplay. So if you don't already have that, check it out. I'll link to it in the show notes. But again, that's a really top to bottom, step-by-step guide to how you can sell your screenplay using this cold query letter approach that I've used. Here's kind of my thinking, and this is kind of a more overarching kind of an idea about how to sell your screenplay, and you can apply it to a lot of things. But to sell your screenplay, you basically need some combination of talent, hard work, and luck. And I just want to define talent. I define talent as sort of the God-given abilities that you were born with and have very little control over. Some people are just born with more creativity, more aptitude to write, and there's really not a lot that we can do to overcome that. We can, of course, work on it, but just in terms of this little example I'm going to give, we're just going to define talent as sort of those things you're born with that you can't control. Skill and hard work is really the next thing, and that's kind of everything that you can control, how hard you work, how much time and energy you put into screenwriting. That's sort of that part of the equation. And then, of course, there's luck. And that's just basically sort of a lottery type event where, you happen to just be at the right place at the right time. So to sell a screenplay, let's just say you need 100 points, and to get those points, you need some combination of those. You need to write a great script or good script, and you need to work hard, and at the end of the day, you need a little bit of luck. But here's the thing: luck is not really a business plan. Luck is not something you can count on or control. It just happens. And there's that old saying, luck is when preparation meets opportunity, and that's not really what I'm talking about for the purposes of this example. Let's just say you go to Vegas and you sit down at a roulette table, and let's say you put down a bet on every single number on the table. The odds are now actually in your favor that your number will come up. I mean, they're not in your favor. There's 100%. You can go to Vegas and you can literally put a bet on every single number, and the odds of it coming up are 100%. So you've effectively eliminated luck from the equation. There's no luck anymore. You've put a bet down on every single number. Your chances of your number coming up are 100%. Now, I know that that's not a profitable strategy in roulette. I mean, you will eventually lose all of your money. But again, the point is you've effectively boiled the luck out of the equation. And here's the thing. With screenwriting, it is a profitable equation. There's really no downside to sending out a gazillion query letters and essentially covering every single number. If you do sell one screenplay, the strategy is profitable. All of all of the money and the time you've spent trying to sell that screenplay will make sense, and it will be profitable. So if you kind of follow this along to the inevitable conclusion, it really then just becomes a function of how am I physically going to contact every person in the industry, or even taken maybe a little more realistically, how am I going to build an enormous database of people in the industry that I can contact? But what we're doing is again, we're just boiling out the luck part of the equation. We're going to build such a massive database that it covers so much ground. You won't ever be able to cover every number, but you'll be able to cover a lot of ground if your database is big enough. And again, that's kind of been the backbone of my strategy. Is I've just tried to continuously try and remove as much luck from the equation as possible. And I've over the years I've built this enormous database of contacts, and I'm just always building it, making it bigger, tweaking it, and trying to get to the point where I'm literally covering everything. Again, I understand it's not a perfect metaphor. I understand you can't cover every single number, but the bigger your database gets, the more ground you can cover. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter whether your script is good or bad. The bottom line is the more people you send it to, the better chance you have of getting an option and getting a sale. And that goes, your odds are better. The bigger your database, your odds are better, even if your screenplay is bad. Not that you would want to have a bad screenplay. So the one thing I do want to make clear, though, this strategy isn't for everyone. I mean, it's a ton of work. It's not just an easy magic bullet, do this, do that, and then all of a sudden you're a screenwriter. It's a ton of work. That should be clear. I mean, you have to write a ton of scripts so that you have a ton of material to keep sending out. I mean, what I've found is what sort of happens with this strategy is you get a lot of low-level producers sort of in the mix, and those are typically a lot of the ones who are responding to your query letters and optioning your scripts, and that's fine because some of those lower-level producers can still get movies made and do get movies made. But what happens is you have to option a lot of scripts that don't get made. So what that means is you have to write a lot of scripts. So you just have to keep churning out a ton of material. And keep sending it out, getting a ton of options, because most of the options that you will have will not materialize. They will not turn into produced scripts. So you need to write a ton of material for this strategy to work. You also have to build, obviously, you have to build a huge database of contacts, and that's not easy or simple either. I mean, there's a lot of different sources. It's easier now than it ever was before, but it's still not that easy. You've got to go out and just open up your Excel spreadsheet and start building a database of contacts. There is some more complex ways of doing it if you have a little bit of a programming background. But the bottom line is you're going to need to spend time and money and energy building this database of contacts. And then once you've written a ton of scripts, you've built a database of contacts, then you have to be really persistent and just keep sending out your script. So that's kind of an overview of my strategy. And again, I don't want to say that this is a magic bullet or it's just simple. It's definitely not simple, but it is possible. If you're willing to do the work, you can really start to eliminate that luck element from the equation, and you can really start to get some scripts out there. The one thing I do kind of want to be clear, though, I don't want to undersell the other ways to break into the industry. I mean, these other ways are still very viable, and as I said, the single biggest way I've heard is people getting low-level jobs. So my strategy is not necessarily the best strategy. It might be the best strategy for me, and it might be the best strategy for you, but it might not be the best strategy for you. So what you need to do is you need to really just get out there and try everything. And that's really what I did. I mean, you try everything and see what works for you. And that's what I did. I mean, when I graduated from college, I moved to LA. I got low-level jobs in the industry, and I submitted to contests. I did everything that I could think of, and I submitted query letters. And I just happened to find that the query letters, they were working for me. So that's kind of the direction I went in. But it's not the only direction. And you really want to get out there and try absolutely everything you can think of and everything you can find. Just one little note about moving to LA is keep in mind, like I keep saying, low-level jobs. You don't even necessarily need to get a low-level job in the industry. A lot of people who write me, they're older, they might have families, but they've got a career that they've been working at for 5 or 10 or longer number of years. Almost every profession, at least in some degree, is represented in the entertainment industry. So you don't need to just get the production assistant or the assistant to the writer or the assistant to the producer job. I mean, if you have some sort of another career, you could probably apply that to the entertainment industry. I mean, if you're a lawyer, certainly the entertainment industry needs lawyers. If you're a bookkeeper, an accountant, all production companies, all movies, when they're made, there's production accountants. There's all different levels of accounting goes on with production. If you're a programmer, I mean, movies need websites, so you can maybe break in and get that IT. Every company has their IT person these days. So almost every skill that you might have, if you've been working at a career, you might be able to simply apply it. Move to LA, apply that skill to some position in the entertainment industry. And again, that just gets you in sort of the flow and the thick of things. And you start to just get a real feel. You get your finger on the pulse of what's selling, and you talk to people. And all that stuff is very, very valuable. Contests. I mentioned contests earlier. That's another thing that, you need to try it and see if it's going to work. So I know I've just kind of glossed over a lot of this, and in future episodes of podcasts, I will get into the real nuts and bolts of effectively launching a query letter strategy. But again, if you want to email to you, just sign up for my free guide. I'll link to that in the show notes. Hopefully, though, there is one big takeaway, and that is, if you ask the question, how do I sell a screenplay? The answer is you have to take action. You have to get out there and you have to start doing something. I get a lot of emails from people who they really have just they've finished a script, but they just haven't really done enough to even know if the script is any good, to even know if there's any chance of ever selling it. And they've submitted to 1 or 2 production companies and they're waiting to hear back, and they've submitted to 1 or 2 contests. It's like, that's just not going to be enough. That's not going to cut it. You got to get out there and really just try some big things and put a lot of effort into selling the script. I mean, I like a lot of people put a lot of emphasis, especially newer writers. They put a ton of emphasis on writing the script. Hey, I've written this script. I would say you need to spend as much time marketing your script as you do writing it. So if you just spent the last 6 months writing your script, plan on spending the next 6 months, same amount of time. If you wrote, an hour a day for 6 months, plan on spending an hour a day for 6 months just trying to market your screenplay. Trying everything, entering, not 1 contest, not 2 contests, dozens and dozens of contests, not sending out, 5 query letters or 10 query letters, sending out hundreds and thousands of query letters. Start to take a step back and see how you can, rearrange your life so that moving to LA is possible. Got to take action. You got to just do something big. These small little things that I hear from so often just are not going to cut it. So hopefully that's a big takeaway, and hopefully that's been helpful. But again, in the next couple of podcasts, I definitely will be getting into some more of the real nuts and bolts of how to effectively launch a query letter strategy. In the next episode, I'm going to give you a brief overview of how I got into the business and how I sold my first couple of screenplays. I think I'm just like a lot of people who are listening to this, in that when I first got out here, I didn't know anybody in the business. I just was a guy with a dream, and I started plugging away. So hopefully the lessons I've learned, you can learn a little something from them. I don't think, I have an overabundance of writing talent. I think I'm just persistent and hardworking, and that's really what's helped me sell a few screenplays. So I think I can help you do the same thing. So if you found this podcast helpful, please go into iTunes and give me a review. This is literally my first podcast episode, so I'm really open to any and all feedback that you might have. I really want to make this the best podcast on screenwriting, and getting your feedback will go a long way to helping me do that. So please, if you have time, go into iTunes and just leave a comment, leave a review, and I'll definitely read it. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a like or put a comment in the comment section and pass it along to your friends. It's much, much appreciated. I just want to take a quick minute and do a plug for my upcoming online course, How to Choose a Marketable Concept for Your Screenplay. The single biggest mistake that I see new screenwriters making is that they write a script based on a concept that is completely unmarketable. By signing up for this online course, I can hopefully help you avoid that problem so that your finished screenplay will be built on a solid foundation. This is a live online course that will be taught by me. Anyone with an internet connection can attend. You can even attend on your iPhone or your iPad or other mobile device. It's scheduled for 1 hour, but I'll be answering every question, so make sure you schedule a little extra time to hang around afterwards in case we go over the allotted hour. I'll be running the course on Saturday, September 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific time. You can sign up to take this one class if you'd like, or if you're already a member of my Selling Your Screenplay Select program, the cost of admissions is included with your monthly membership. Also, the class will be recorded, so if you can't attend the live webinar, you can get the replay anytime you like by joining Selling Your Screenplay Select. To learn more about this class, simply go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/classes. I want to end each episode with a segment I'm going to call Writing Words, and it will hopefully offer a little motivation and inspiration. So a couple of weeks ago, I attended a mastermind group, and it was actually an entrepreneurial mastermind group, and the 2 presenters each told a story at the beginning of the session, and it was related to create a successful business and be a successful entrepreneur. But I think the stories really relate to a lot of things in life, and certainly relate to screenwriting. The first story was the presenter said when he was a kid, he took karate. And one day he went into his karate class, and the sensei was there, and he had a bunch of boards, and him and his partner were kicking through these boards. And they said, today we're going to teach you how to do that. So they gave all the kids some boards, and they started trying to kick through them, and they partnered up. And this guy's partner was holding the board, and he just couldn't kick through it. He was kicking as hard as he could. He couldn't kick through it. And the sensei came up and said, what's wrong? What's wrong? He said, I just can't kick through it. The sensei went to the guy holding the board and just turned the board 90 degrees and then said, try it now. And he took a kick and just cracked right through the board. And when you're kicking on a board, you have to get the grain right. If you're kicking against the grain, it's very, very difficult. And the point is that small little changes can make a big difference. It can make all the difference. It can be the difference between success and failure. So kind of keep that in mind, that you've got to be smart, and you've got to make these little changes to what you're doing and make little improvements. And those things can really add up, and those can be the difference between selling your screenplay and not selling your screenplay. The next story was this guy told he was in a bar once, and he ran into this very successful business guy, and he said, what's the secret to being successful and being rich? And the guy said, there's no secret. Just go out, work 7 days a week, 15-hour days, and do that for about 10 years, and you'll be successful. And that kind of sums it up. And maybe that's a little excessive, but the point is that sometimes there's no replacing just getting down, putting your head down, and doing the work. And I think if you really look at those two stories, those are really the key. And that's sort of the backbone of my philosophy with everything I do, but certainly in screenwriting, is that you got to be smart about what you do and the things that you do, but you've also got to just put your head down and do the work. You do those two things. You're smart about what you do, and you do a ton of work, and good things are bound to happen. And I believe that you too can have some success. So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in, and goodbye.